Hey there, my name's Niandra and this is a guide to Mercy's Resurrection. We'll cover the basics, some different types of res, plus when you should or should not use it. Okay, so let's blast through the simple stuff. Mercy's Resurrect can currently bring back one teammate from the dead every 30 seconds. That being said, if res is on cooldown, you can switch off Mercy and back to her to reset it at the expense of losing your ult charge. This can sometimes be pretty useful. Say during a fight you Valk, you res, and your team loses anyway. If you're afraid of a snowball, then definitely consider this, because who cares if you reset your ult charge when you have like 2%. Once you start the res, Mercy is significantly slowed down for 1.75 seconds. For starters, it's important to ask yourself if your team can afford you leaving the fight, resing, then returning. It might not be wise to res Reinhardt while Soldier is actively taking damage. Secondly, you aren't completely frozen and pretty much want to take advantage of the minimal movement you do get every single time you res. Even if it's just taking a couple of steps back to get a quarter-second head start on falling back, it's almost always worth it. Personally, I only really make an exception if moving will make me less safe, like the only places I can move are more exposed than my current position. Mercy's res has a range of 5 meters, and if she leaves that, it will be cancelled, same if Mercy is stunned or hacked. Remember, you have roughly a 10-second window to res a dead person. If the enemy has CC, try to watch out for it so you can res after they've used it. One thing to keep in mind is that a boop has to move you out of range, so if an enemy hits you late into the res, it is possible to still get it off since, well, the res is over before you can actually leave the range. Since Mercy can cancel her own res, be careful during Valkyrie because of your increased movement. I'm also a bit wary if there's like a Lucia on my team since sudden speed boost can be off-putting. Credits to No Bears in Russia on Reddit for this one. One thing that's kinda interesting is how Mercy can switch weapons during a Resurrect. This means if you're fighting someone near a dead ally, you can lock them down, start the res, switch during the animation, and immediately begin beaming your teammate when they're brought back. If you do this fast enough, you can actually get Mercy's pistol to reload itself during the Resurrect. One thing you might have noticed here is that if you start resing and switch weapons, the view model of the weapon you have switched to will not be drawn. Here's me resing with the pistol out normally. Here's me resing and flicking to the staff halfway through. It's quite useful to just generally do this since there's not a model blocking your screen. In the past, I've accidentally spread misinformation by stating that Mercy can look down to the floor during Resurrect to hide her head hitbox behind her wings. This is not true. Although you can look at the floor, Mercy's model does not actually move. That being said, there is this angle in which the wing kinda blocks the head, and then this angle where the raised hand also kinda blocks it. Do with this information what you will. I don't think spinning during a res is a bad idea, just make sure you don't disorient yourself when the animation finishes. Due to the way Overwatch works, you can hold down your res key while not in res range, then enter the range, and you'll immediately start the action on the first frame it's possible. Obviously, be careful because the res may not be as safe as you think it is, however, this is really useful when there's very little time left on the res and you're unsure if you're gonna make it. On a similar note, you can hold down either heal or damage boost while resing to automatically do it once it's finished. You can use this to either look towards your res target for extra protection or track an injured ally during your res to help them when you're free. On a similar note, you can also hold down the Guardian Angel key while resing to immediately reposition once it's over. My favourite use for this is when someone dies pushed up, I'll go for the res, turn around and be able to fall back immediately. Moving on, let's look at the different types of res. 1. The LOS res. Simply press the button and use your limited movement to shift behind cover. Ideally, the majority of your reses should fall under this one. As long as you start the res and stay in range, it doesn't matter if there's objects or terrain in the way. 2. The hover res. If you've got an ally on the edge of high ground, fly to them, hold Angelic Descent while falling to stay in range. If you don't activate Angelic Descent, you will probably fall too fast and cancel it. 3. The falling jump res. Very similar to the last one, fly to a corpse above you, jump to bunny hop, then res while falling freely. Because the bunny hop gives you extra height, you can generally just fall without having to use Angelic Descent, although feel free to pepper it in. 4. The high ground crouch res. So if you're on medium high ground and there's a res below slightly out of range, try crouching and you may be able to get it then. As you can see here, there's no res icon when I'm standing, but it appears when I crouch. 5. The falling soul res. Say for example your Pharah or Echo dies in the sky. You'll notice that their soul then falls to the ground. The way Resurrect works is that it checks your position versus the soul's position when the res started. This means if the soul moves away from you, you do not want to follow it. You want to stay where it was when the res began. If you try to fall with the soul, your res will likely get cancelled. 6. The super jump res. I've already done a full video on this one, so instead of explaining it again, just check out the link in the description. Most people describe it as you just need to jump earlier than you would with a full height super jump, which is basically the gist of it, but if you want more context, you know where to get it. Moving on, I want to talk about when not to res. I'm going to split it into different categories and want to start with unnecessary. An unnecessary res means that it wasn't harmful to the team or even bad overall, but the ally could have been left to respawn normally without any real consequences. There's a few common examples of this. If your team is attacking and someone gets picked off close to spawn before your team has properly engaged in a fight, it can be worth leaving them. That being said, if they die right at spawn just as the match has started, I will usually revive, switch off Mercy, then switch back to her since resetting my ult charge doesn't really matter. You also may want to make an exception if your team is running low on time. For example, it's round 3, you guys have 30 seconds left, and that ally is really important. The reason I avoid these reses is because I want to save it for when my team is more engaged. If I res my Widow right outside of spawn and the enemy team also has Mercy, she's going to have res ready when my team pushes in while I don't, which places me at a disadvantage. Another example would be, say enemy Widow kills my Ashe, so I res her, then Widow picks off my second support. We're still a person down, we can't push, so I gain nothing from reviving that first teammate. That being said, all of that previous information kind of relies on your team being aware that they're a person down and a willingness to wait for them. At Diamond and below especially, that's not always going to be the case. You will have teams that push forward anyway into a 5v6, which is a huge disadvantage. In those situations, I would consider resing a necessary evil, although communicating with your team might solve the issue. Anyway, another example would again be on attack. You're just about to capture an objective and there's a teammate dead next to you. You notice that with how the timers line up, they're going to respawn after you cap. This means they're not going to respawn here, but here instead, which means they're going to take very little time to come back, especially if they're playing someone mobile. Last of all, say your team is defending an area close to your spawn, like point B of 2CP or the last area in a payload map. If your team has won the fight, let the dead ally respawn normally because they'll be back way faster than the enemy team can regroup and push in. If you res Ashe and the enemy team is swift to regroup and push in, they might be on point before your res is ready again. In summary, the gist with unnecessary reses is that Resurrect will almost always be way more valuable when used during fights as opposed to before or after a fight. And on that note, let's move on to harmful Resurrects. In one way or another, these hurt your team and mostly occur when Mercy is on autopilot, panicking, or just generally unaware of things going on around her. You know, stuff like resing in front of an enemy and they kill you. Generally avoid going for a res if you're actively taking damage. This sounds obvious, but I've definitely seen Mercies get confused and disoriented and just go for it anyway. Sometimes it's okay to die or leave a fight with Resurrect not used, at least then it's not on cooldown next fight. Maybe you res someone next to an enemy and your ally just dies again. That one is especially bad since you basically reset your teammate's respawn timer and the enemy got extra ult charge from a second kill. It's often worth flicking your eyes to the kill feed to see who the killer was. If it was Widow, is she in a position where she can watch the corpse? Or did she grapple into the air for an off angle and she can no longer see it, making the res safe? Is the killer short ranged and did we see them leave? Are they potentially hiding nearby and expecting the revive? Or was the killer a Sombra who translocated away after the pick? Another really common example I see is Mercies who res while 3 or 4 other allies are dead. Unless that player is a god gamer with a crazy ult or you're stalling, it's probably best to just fall back and regroup. One thing I've seen in VOD reviews of Plat and below is Mercies who res, let's say Genji, when the rest of the team is dead. That Genji then wasn't paying attention to the fight, they just know that they're alive, so then they ult, and there's no backup because everyone else is dead. Ultimately, it was not Mercy's fault that her Genji wasted blade here, but she did give him the opportunity to do it. As mentioned earlier, you want to be careful about going for a res if your alive allies are injured or taking damage. This is especially important if it's the second support you plan to bring back, since the team will be left with no healing once you start resing. It is crucial to ask yourself if your team can afford you going for this res, because sometimes it will be better to just keep everyone else stable instead. The best way to avoid harmful reses is to simply keep track of enemy positions and ability usage throughout a fight. If I see enemy McCree roll away, I know he can't close the distance between us. If an enemy is dueling my ally, can they afford to turn their attention onto me? Before you attempt a res, you should have a general idea on whether it's safe or not and be confident in your decision. Last of all, you've got res priority and the question, should I go for this res? Truth be told, this isn't really something I can teach because it's so situational, hence my focus on when not to res. The most impactful reses will be the ones used to push an ongoing team fight more in your favour or to stall. Not every good resurrect will fall under those two categories, but they should have purpose or leave your team in a better position, unless you're doing placements and trying to pad your stats, in which case go for it. It's important to ask yourself, if I revive this person, can they provide value that justifies the risk I just took? For me, my priorities are generally whoever's the safest and the second healer because of how much they enable Mercy, but not everyone will agree with that. Also, remember that having Valkyrie ready will allow you to go for a lot more reses thanks to the extra movement, health regen, and doubled beam length. As long as the rest of the fight generally looks good, it can be worth popping Valk to revive someone. A couple things to close this video off. Remember to check the scoreboard before reviving to see if that dead ally has ult ready, since that might influence your decision when picking between two teammates. Secondly, when possible, please let your team know if you're going for a res, partially because some allies may be able to help you, but also because the team may need to adjust how they're playing because they're about to be a support down. And that is basically all from me. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and consider joining my Discord. It's full of great people and a lot of Mercy mains there. Sorry for not uploading for like 2 months. I'm sure you can guess why, considering, you know, the state of Overwatch and everything. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.